On this episode of The Buffalo, Justin Trudeau wastes nearly $4 million of your dollars to run a net zero greenwashing labeling program for some of Canada's most fossil fuel reliant industries.
I can say that we are now on a track to reach 40 to 45% reduction by 2030, and we're going to be hitting that net zero by 2050. And we're going to do it not just because it's the right thing to do for the planet, but because we know, as everyone in this room knows, that's the competitive advantage. That's the ability for us to create good jobs and a strong future for all Canadians.
We'll cap oil and gas sector emissions today and ensure they decrease tomorrow at a pace and scale needed to reach net zero by 2050. That's no small task for a major oil and gas producing country. It's a big step that's absolutely necessary.
Canada is one of the top oil and gas producers in the world, and yet over the past 7 years, we've become one of the strongest voices around the world on fighting climate change, including by bringing in one of the strongest broad-based prices on pollution that any country has. And 7 years in, we're really seeing that it's starting to have all those positive impacts.
If Justin Trudeau isn't telling you what you can and can't protest, he's telling you that it's time to shrink your lifestyle, shrink your bank account, and shrink your car to achieve his goals of net zero. Now, net zero is a bizarre idea that every emission of greenhouse gas has to be met by a capture or an offset of that same greenhouse gas, which will only serve to make everything you do impossibly expensive and will make life in the developing world even shorter and more miserable as it drives out of reach our level of comfortable lifestyle with insurmountable climate policy roadblocks erected in the way by climate oligarchs and environmentalist colonialists. Now, one of the ways that Justin Trudeau has been preening to his World Economic Forum masters is through something he's called a net zero challenge. It's a government program, naturally, whereby companies get the net zero stamp of approval. They commit to achieving net zero, thereby making their product, good, or service more expensive for their consumer, and they get a neat little attaboy from the federal government. The net zero challenge doesn't even actually reduce emissions if that's the goal, and they tell me that is the goal. All it does is, like I said, give the Justin Trudeau stamp of approval on whatever plan the company plans to execute eventually, maybe someday, possibly in the near or maybe far off future. And the companies participating in the net zero challenge, most of them wouldn't even exist without fossil fuels. Look at this. Canada Post, delivering mail without fossil fuels, good luck. The Edmonton Regional Airports Authority, Toronto Airports, General Motors, Indigo Parking, Ottawa Airport, Vancouver Airports, Loblaws. Every single one of these companies would be non-existent without our old friend fossil fuels. And yet, for a scratch on the head from the federal government, they'll commit to getting rid of the very thing they need to exist without an ounce of self-awareness. It's all a marketing play for these companies. It curries favor with environmentalists and the World Economic Forum and United Nations and, of course, the federal government, while the companies pass along the increased costs of the implementation of their ridiculous plan to the consumer already struggling with inflation. Today's episode of The Buffalo is brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project. The Alberta Prosperity Project is a nonpartisan educational society uniting all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their prosperity, interests, freedoms, rights, and self-determination. And net zero is a direct attack on Alberta prosperity and our economy. And if you're not paying for the net zero challenge on the front end with these companies through increased costs to their goods and services, you're paying for it on the back end. From Justin Trudeau, let me show you. We have this information by way of an order paper question posed by Conservative MP Earl Dreeshen. From the beautiful Alberta riding of Red Deer Mountain View, Dreeshen asked the federal government how much it costs to administer their net zero challenge program, which again, I reiterate, is just a rubber stamp, not a tangible program to reduce emissions. If you care about that sort of thing, and as you know, I don't, but the people making these programs keep telling me that they do. Duration asked the federal government for their cost to administer their little busy work rubber stamp program, which includes the cost to conduct ongoing stakeholder engagement for the design, launch, and implementation of the challenge. And of course, verifying commitment letters from the companies, as well as communications activities, like regularly updating the Net Zero Challenge website and posting the participants' names. Oh, great. We know it costs $3.8 million to do this busy work so far, and they want to do this in perpetuity, rubber stamping greenwashing programs from companies that wouldn't exist at all without fossil fuels. This is all just another reason the West wants to insulate ourselves from the self-destructive anti-oil policies of Justin Trudeau's federal government. To do anything less is economic suicide for Alberta. This has been The Buffalo. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. To see more Western-centric and Western independence-minded stories just like this, be sure to visit thebuffalo.ca.